What's good, ladies and gentlemen? It's your favorite Italian plumber here, Mario, coming at you to drop What If Deku Had Every Quirk Part 2. You guys ended up making me incredibly happy with the support that you guys ended up dropping on Part 1. So if you guys could keep that insane support going and leave a like on this video, and if you haven't left a like on the last one, go do it, because it would seriously help out so much, and it seriously motivates me so much more to keep these videos going. That said though, ladies and gentlemen, you're in for quite a good video today, so I'm not gonna say nothing else, so let's get into it.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
We kick off part 2 with Izuku going to the top of the roof. This would be right after Izuku just finished having breakfast, and Izuku would wonder to himself what quirk he has access to today. This is when Izuku would point his quirk towards the direction of the sea, and once doing so, Izuku would try to shoot a quirk out. Nothing works. Then he tries to do the Spider-Man thing, seeing if maybe he finally got lucky and got access to spider-like abilities, but no. But eventually, Izuku would be walking downstairs thinking to himself that it didn't work, when suddenly, he would look at his mom, high-five her, and suddenly Inko would fall to the ground. Izuku would realize exactly what just happened immediately, and he'd be like, oh, gravity quirk. Suddenly he turns it off, and then he tells his mom sorry about that, but he's trying to adjust to this new quirk. And she'd be like, it's fine, sweetie, I'm used to it, before then telling Izuku that he should go, he's late for school. Deku's like, you're right, before he then grabs his bag and makes his way towards UA. Izuku would end up arriving, and pretty much what would end up happening is that Izuku would pretty much just end up going to school, right? He arrives, getting there on the train, and Bakugo would be like, so Deku, what quirk do you have today? Deku looks at him and would be like, just some gravity quirk. And then Bakugo would be like, gravity quirk? You mean like chubby cheeks over there? And Deku would say, nah, like this. As he shoves Bakugo, he doesn't even have to make direct contact. He just straight pulls his hand out, and Bakugo's gravitational force would go times 10. It'd be like times 10 earth gravity. So Bakugo falls onto one knee and he'd be like, yeah, that's kind of strong. Deku would look at him and say, you have no idea. I don't even know what the extent of this quirk is, but I figure doing 10 times earth gravity would be a pretty cool start. Bakugo then looks at Deku and says, you're telling me that quirk's pretty powerful. I think maybe if we were to spar today, you'd have me beat, but luckily, I don't feel like sparring today. Deku looks at him and says, how convenient, huh? And Bakugo says, shut up, nerd, before they then walk into the classroom, sit down in their seats, and this is when Aizawa would walk inside of the room and be like, alright, did all of you guys get your permission slip signed? And everybody would be like, sure did. They each walk up individually and give Aizawa their slips, as eventually they all make their way on towards the bus to get to the USJ. Now, they would arrive, and once they do so, they end up seeing a purple mist go up into the sky after 13 gives her lame speech. And Izuku, seeing this, would look towards Aizawa, who looks with a worried expression and sees Kurogiri in the air. And Izuku immediately realizes, okay, he's a villain. So he uses his gravity quirk to crush Kurogiri under immense gravity that would actually hurt Kurogiri. Keep in mind, it wouldn't hurt Kurogiri if he was just mist, but he has that metal plate on him, so crushing that with the force of 30 times gravity would definitely do a number on Kurogiri. He's completely taken out of the equation, which means that all of the students don't actually end up getting teleported to different spots this time, and instead they all stick together. Izuku would watch as Aizawa jumps down to the ground and begins facing off against a couple of villains, and Deku looks at Bakugo before Bakugo and Deku jump off towards the direction of the villains. Izuku immediately slamming his hand down on the ground would create a crater, using the gravitational force to make his body so heavy for an instant as he hits the ground with his fist and crash, like Tsunade level punch, as he then immediately goes back to normal gravity, and then looking towards the direction of a bunch of villains, Izuku forces them to be under 20 times earth gravity, crushing them under the pressure, as Bakugo comes in and uses a howitzer impact to absolutely obliterate tons and tons of villains. Aizawa, using his cancellation quirk, then takes out 3 villains, and this is when they would turn towards the direction of a man with white hair and weird looking skin and a really scratched up neck who would be scratching at himself being like, it's not fair, Nomu, kill them. And you know, the Nomu would immediately look towards the direction of Aizawa and it like begins running, but Izuku is not playing no games. Holding one hand out, the Nomu would then sink 10 feet underground, not being able to move a muscle, considering that Izuku's gravitational thing that he put on the Nomu was 100 times. The Nomu gets crushed under the pressure immensely, considering that not even Dragon Ball characters were willing to put up with 100 times Earth gravity. And then Izuku, looking towards Shigaraki, he notices that Shigaraki would be like, Kurogiri, get me out of here, they cheated. But he realizes Kurogiri never comes. He then starts scratching his neck violently as he rushes at Izuku and says, it's all your fault. He would then grab at Izuku but realize that his quirk's not working, as Aizawa was using his cancellation ability, and Deku just puts gravity on Shigaraki times 5. Shigaraki falls onto one knee and would say, damn you, heroes, before Izuku would then say, look, you're gonna tell me exactly why you came here. And Shigaraki would say, isn't it obvious? To kill you and that damned All Might. As Izuku would say, sure, killing us and All Might, fine, but how are you gonna do that exactly? And you know, Shigaraki says, that thing over there, we were gonna use that. Deku upping up the gravity more and more as Shigaraki tries to lie for a moment, but he finally lets out the truth. And then Izuku looks towards the direction of Shigaraki, asking him who their leader is, considering he can't possibly be it. He's an overgrown man-child. And you know, Shigaraki lies saying, I'm the leader, but you know, Deku just ups the gravity and Shigaraki is like, it's all for one, you know, he tells him, and Izuku finally lets up. Shigaraki would be about to get restrained by Aizawa, but that's when suddenly, as Izuku and Bakugo would have turned away and they would have walked off, you know, thinking that the fight was already done for, trying to go off and face off against the villains that were in different sections, like making a challenge for themselves, they both went away, right? Or they were at least going away. Bakugo would have blasted out faster than Deku could have, but Deku would be a distance away. And it would be at this moment that a black portal would open in the ground and it would suck Shigaraki inside, with a man with a mask saying, I'll see you later, Midoriya. As from here, the portal would close and Izuku would be like, what? And he realizes that guy, he was definitely talking to me, you know what I mean? But pretty much what would end up happening is that Aizawa would say that they need to clean this mess up, and then all of them end up pretty much taking out the rest of the villains. Following this altercation happening, they would have at least 1 week off of school, and during this week off, they pretty much end up going on a very, very decent training moment. Like Bakugo and Deku train together, and during this time, Deku would end up getting really, really OP quirks, wouldn't you know it? And I'm not gonna go over the quirks because I'd have to like use the generator a bunch of times, but just know he does get a bunch of OP quirks, and he does train a lot with Bakugo, making Bakugo a lot stronger than he was before, getting him prepped to using different quirks, you know what I mean? But eventually they end up returning to class, and on the first day that they returned, the day that everybody would be briefed on the UA festival and stuff like that, and Uraraka's like, are you guys ready? You know what I mean? The day that that happens, Izuku would end up just looking at All Might as he walks into the classroom, and he sees that his health bar is low. Izuku would finally realize what his quirk is today, seeing as he's been seeing people's health bars all day, and he'd be like, oh, I guess I could just look at people's health. But realizing that All Might's is like in 40, like it looks like he's only in 60% health the whole time, Izuku would pull All Might to the side after class and ask him what that's about. All Might would tell him what happened, and Izuku would say that maybe he can help him. Izuku puts his hand on top of All Might, and it would be at this moment that All Might would feel completely healed. However, Izuku would pass out into unconsciousness, having drained himself using a quirk that he wasn't used to using at all, and he just thought that it might have been a healing quirk, but apparently he was right. All Might gets healed back to 100%, and now he doesn't have to go into a Small Might form, and Izuku would be passed out for the rest of the day. He wakes up the next day, and it would be the day of the sports festival. And on this day, Deku would actually end up getting a very decent quirk, which I'm not going to be telling you guys what it is yet, but I'm going to reveal it a little bit later on. So pretty much what ends up happening is that we would get to the sports festival, and Bakugo does his usual tangent of being like, I'm gonna win. You know what I mean? Or actually, no, he doesn't. Izuku's the one who goes on the podium and would give a really like motivational speech, you know what I mean? Telling everybody that, you know, everybody could become a hero, you know what I mean? Like, do your best out there, everybody, you know what I mean? And, you know, they get really hyped and excited and people cheer Deku's name, and Bakugo looks at Deku and says, if I was up there, I would have just told them I'm gonna win, but seeing as I didn't get to go up there, I guess I'll have to wait for next year or something like that. And then Deku would laugh and be like, sure. As from here, we get into the first thing that's going to be happening, and that's the race. Deku, using nothing but his physical speed that he's been training on, seeing as he has superhuman speed, would end up getting third place during the race portion of everything. And eventually we would jump into the cavalry battle, which Izuku would team up with Bakugo, Uraraka, and Tokiyami, and ultimately get through as first place, seeing as Bakugo would have ended up having the first place headband, and that team would have been established. Mei Hatsume would have been like, please let me join your team, but Bakugo would have been like, get lost, you freak. And then they would have ended up recruiting Uraraka and Tokiyami. After this, they end up advancing, and Deku's first opponent would be none other than Shinso Hitoshi. The battle would immediately start. Actually, no, I'm not going to start it off yet. Deku, as soon as he would be shown that he's going to be facing off against Shinso, would be approached by Ojiro, who would tell him to be careful around that guy, that his quirk is strange. He spoke to him and then nothing. It was almost as if he had no control over his body anymore. But Deku would simply just be like, sure. And then ultimately we have a 30-minute break in which all of the students would be allowed to have a moment of rest, right? During this time, Izuku would go on his phone and text back his mom saying that he's going to do his best to win this thing, but that he's not sure because his quirk for today is a little different. And Inko would say to do her best, that she knows that her son is going to be a phenomenal hero someday. You know, he is a great hero after all, you know what I mean? And so Deku would be like, yeah, thanks, mom. Ultimately getting off of his phone and making his way towards the arena. He ends up arriving and all of the fans would immediately go haywire, being like, Izuku, you know what I mean? But pretty much what ends up happening is that as soon as the match would be called by midnight, Deku would immediately scream at Shinso in a way that you guys probably weren't expecting. Deku would use something similar to Present Mike's quirk, where he can emit large frequency noises. However, Deku's is a bit more OP and he has way more control over it than Present Mike does. It's kind of like an evolved version of it, right? And so doing that, he shoots Shinso off of the stage, and his ears would even start bleeding at the fact that Izuku just he screamed so loud. The frequency was insane, right? Shinso's words didn't even get out of his mouth before that happened, but ultimately Deku would advance on to the next round, and so what would pretty much end up happening is that he would be facing off against Todoroki next. Bakugo would end up telling Izuku to crush him, and Deku would say that he plans to, saying that, you know, he thought that honestly Bakugo was going to be wanting to fight Todoroki. Bakugo says he does actually want to, but since he got matched up against him, to do him a favor and knock him a new one. Deku smiles, and Todoroki, seeing as he has no reason to go up to Deku and be like, are you All Might's secret love child? Instead, just kind of leaves him alone. And during this time, Izuku would have a little bit of a talk with Uraraka. You know, she'd be pretty sad that she lost to Bakugo, but Deku lifts up her spirits by telling her that she can just get stronger, that her quirk of hers is amazing, and that she shouldn't, you know, be downed. This would end up sparking a crush between Uraraka towards Deku, which isn't reciprocated, and Deku would then make his way towards the stadium where he would face off against Todoroki. As soon as the match would start, Todoroki shoots a giant geyser of ice, which Izuku would use a sonic scream towards, and the ice would just shatter under the pressure. It would be just like when Izuku used his fingers, breaking each one and destroying the ice, but every time that Todoroki uses an ice attack, Deku just screams at it and it just shatters into a million little pieces, making the stadium extremely cold, and people would be like, I should have brought a sweater. But ultimately Deku and Todoroki would continue fighting, and Todoroki would use his ice to create separation between him and Deku, but Deku just gets closer and closer, and the screams would get louder and louder towards Todoroki. This match would be an explosive one, and Todoroki's ice would be going everywhere. Him realizing that his ice isn't doing anything would end up having to jump back and use his ice to go into the air and maybe try to shoot ice attacks at Deku, but it's just absolutely not working, and Deku would end up actually overpowering Todoroki's ice with the sonic boom screams, right? Ultimately getting close enough to Todoroki where he can finally use hand-to-hand combat, and Todoroki was about to use his fire, not wanting to lose as a reflex, but ultimately realizing he was about to use it, he just kind of gives up on himself, and Deku takes this opportunity and moment to absolutely crush Todoroki. He ends up defeating him with one fell scream in his face and a punch to the gut, and Todoroki gets sent flying out of the arena, leading Deku versus Bakugo to be the next match that would be announced. Deku would smile knowing that this was ultimately going to be the final result, and so he gets happy and tells Bakugo not to hold out on him. Bakugo tells him not to hold out on him either, and so both adversaries would go to the stadium before getting ready and cracking their necks. Bakugo cracking his knuckles before saying, "You ready?" And Deku would say, "I was born ready." Immediately the match would start, and Bakugo, knowing that Deku was going to start it off with a sonic boom scream, would shoot his way up and towards the air. Now, Deku, seeing this, would shoot at the direction of Bakugo where he was, but he would miss completely, and Bakugo spins in the air and shoots an AP shot at Deku, which would actually hit. Deku would get sent flying on the floor, and then Bakugo would kind of like shoot closer and shoot an explosion at Deku, which would cause Deku's vision to be completely caught off guard because of the smoke. And then Deku realizes that he can't see, but Bakugo can't either. And so Bakugo from the air would begin shooting massive amounts of explosions. And as that's happening, Deku would shoot a sonic boom scream at the direction where he thinks they're coming from. And so the explosions and the sonic boom scream would kind of like clash with each other. Bakugo amping it up even more and higher explosion amps. And the explosion and the sound waves would just like clash, like they're going crazy. Ultimately though, Deku shoots more and more sound waves, and Bakugo falls down onto the ground, his ears bleeding, as he now went completely deaf. He can't really hear anything, but he decides that if that's the case, he's gonna just have to sacrifice his body for this dub. Getting up close and personal to Deku, and Deku would realize that Bakugo was right there, being completely caught off guard by his approach, but Bakugo shoots an explosion point blank at Deku's face, weakening him a lot, and Deku gets up, and then Bakugo clears the smoke with another explosion, and they then get into close combat fighting. Bakugo's pretty good at it considering he's been training with Izuku this whole time, and so the match would be kind of even considering that Deku just got a complete like flashbang to the face, you know what I mean? Bakugo gets crazier and crazier with the explosions, and ultimately it would be a battle of attrition, seeing whose stamina and endurance can last longer, but ultimately it would be Bakugo who comes out on top, being more accustomed to his quirk than Deku would be to the sonic boom screams that he actually has access to. And so Bakugo would be announced the winner of the sports festival event for UA High, the best student in class 1A. And so right after this, Bakugo goes up to the stadium accepting his medal. Deku goes up there as well, and he congratulates Bakugo, and Bakugo would be like, "Huh?" Not hearing him, and Deku would be like, "My bad about screaming at you," sending him a text at Bakugo, which Bakugo would listen to. I mean, not listen to, but he would see, and then he would reply, "It was worth it. I beat you in front of everybody." And Deku was like, "Whatever, it's not like this is the first time I've lost to you. Keep in mind, I have more wins." And Bakugo would laugh, saying, "Yeah, but I beat you in front of everybody though, nerd." As from here, he laughs, and Deku, Bakugo, and Tokiyami would be given their first, second, and third place tokens by All Might. Sorry, medals, right? I was thinking about Wreck-It Ralph, that's why I said tokens. But what ends up going down after this is they would find themselves in class the very next day. And on this day, let's generate a quirk. What quirk are we going to be giving towards Izuku? What quirk? Let's see. We're going to go with the glitch quirk. On this day, Deku's going to be having a glitch quirk, which it's not really going to do anything considering nothing's going to happen, but I figured it'd be cool to know. On this day, however, that they would return to school, the main thing that would go down is that they would end up picking their hero names and also picking their internships. When it comes to Izuku's hero name, he's going to end up going with the name Roulette, seeing as every single day it's a new quirk. So he goes with the name Roulette, and he still isn't completely sure if he's going to go with that one, but it just seems like kind of a cool name, you know what I mean? So yeah, by the way, shout out Flame. I know you told me the name that I should go with while we were playing Fortnite, so shout out to you. But anyways, what pretty much ends up happening following this is that Deku would just pick his agency, right? And All Might would be like, you should go with Gran Torino because, Gran Torino could probably teach you a lot. And Deku would just be like, yeah, I would, but, I don't really think I will. So instead of Deku going with Gran Torino, Deku would end up asking Nezu if there was any way at all that Deku could intern by himself, you know what I mean? Because Deku really doesn't see the point of going with some random hero other than to just learn information on how to run an agency, considering that his quirk is different every day, so training with a pro hero wouldn't really help him out that much. Nezu ends up agreeing, telling Izuku that if anything, he should train in Hosu City, saying that that's where the hero killer is, and that he could potentially end up getting an OP quirk and maybe taking him out, hunting him. That could be his mission. He can intern under him, and the only way he's gonna allow it is if he promises to defeat Stain. Deku agrees to these conditions, and All Might would be so happy with Izuku. You know, like, All Might basically views Izuku as like his favorite student, considering that Izuku was the one responsible for bringing All Might back to his 100% like healing form, right? And so what pretty much ends up happening is that Deku would make his way towards Hosu City, and on these days, the first day Izuku would get the quirk Seaweed. Kind of like the girl with the vine hair, Izuku would have Seaweed for hair that could pretty much shoot out and do whatever it is that he wants. Also having the ability of Jetstream, which Izuku would have, that is very, very similar to Gran Torino's, but no, I'm just going to say it's literally Gran Torino's quirk. And so during this time, Izuku calls All Might and he would say, hey, you remember that hero you told me about? Any way I could go? He goes over there, meets Gran Torino, and they end up having a bit of a talk. Gran Torino teaches Deku how to use the quirk, and on this particular day would be the day of the Hosu incident. So Gran Torino and Deku make their way towards Hosu City, and it would be here that they would hear a massive explosion. Deku would look out of the window and see a Nomu coming at them, and Deku does exactly what Gran Torino would have done in the original, shooting out of his seat and jumping at the Nomu before sending it crashing onto the ground and using his jet quirk to pretty much absolutely destroy the Nomu, giving it absolutely no chance or hope at, defeating Deku. Deku, following this, hears a gut-wrenching scream that sounds super familiar, and it would be Ida. And so Deku uses his Jetstream quirk to just shoot over there and would finally end up arriving to see Stain, the hero killer.